But my name is Alyssa Proudfoot-Siegel. I am membership and program coordinator here at the League. Very excited to see you all virtually. I'm in charge of mobile workshops and rides here at the summit. So typically I don't get to see a lot of the virtual participants, but I love being able to do the virtual rides and see Jeff ride through our beautiful city and show it off for everyone. And it is an amazing day to do that. Oh my gosh. We have been, you told me 7 years with DC Cycling Concierge now, but Jeff puts on some beautiful rides. So I am so excited to share another one with you. Feel free to take it away, Jeff.
All right. So first, because I know I have some serious cyclists in this crew, I'm just going to give a quick disclaimer that I am going to be following the rules of the road to the best of my ability. And I'm going to be doing something very different than I would if I were leading a group. There are a few places where I'm going to be taking you to a few sites where I do need to get up on sidewalks and so forth. So I just want to make that quick disclaimer, not to get too judgy on me. I do a virtual tour quite differently than I would if I had a group in tow. I want to also encourage people to ask questions in the chat. I won't be able to see them, but Charlie will, and we'll pass them along. And so we definitely want to hear about that. So my name is Jeff Miller, and I am the DC Cycling Concierge. I've worked in bicycle advocacy as a leader at state, local, and national organizations for most of my career, and started this business 7 years ago to give me a lot of flexibility with my young children and a chance to share my love of Washington, D.C. and my passion of bicycling. So this is a little out of the norm. I mean, most of my business is giving private tours to families, couples, some corporate groups, and so forth. So if you have anyone who you think might be interested in something like this, feel free to email me, jeff@dccyclingconcierge.com. So I also want to introduce myself as an Illinois boy. I'm an American mutt. I was born in Southern California, lived briefly in St. Louis, but I grew up most of my childhood in Illinois. I grew up in a very, very small town of Petersburg, which is about 25 miles northwest of Springfield, Illinois, so right in the middle of the state. And I was actually 3 miles out of town, but a mile away from an old frontier settlement that only existed for 10 years. It was called New Salem. It existed in the 1830s. And for 6 of the 10 years, there was a young man there. Let me introduce him to you. This is Abe. Abraham Lincoln lived in Petersburg, New Salem, for 6 years, from the ages of 19 to 25. And he worked on riverboats. He was a co-owner of the Barry Lincoln store. He was the postmaster for a while, and he did some surveying, and even surveyed a road that went through my yard. Also surveyed my hometown of Petersburg. So, growing up in Illinois, it was a lot of Lincoln, and I love sharing that little piece. This is my homeboy here. And I lived in DC. I don't know how many years before I found out about this. We are right here at Lincoln's Cottage. This was built by a man named Riggs, who was a banker in Washington, D.C. If you are familiar with PNC Bank, that is Riggs Bank today. And Mr. Riggs had built this house, had lost a child, and so the house is associated enough with it that he sells it off, and it's here on a property that is owned by the federal government. Some of what we have right behind here is what's known as Old Soldiers Home, and Old Soldiers Home played many different roles, but it is an active housing situation for American veterans. So there are still hundreds of residents today who have served in our armed forces. And typically these are bachelors or folks who don't have anyone to take care of them. Some of them are very able-bodied and active. I've met a couple of veterans visiting, biking around Lincoln's Cottage. Is elected in 1860, inaugurated 1861, and the southern states start pulling away. So he's pretty busy that first year, set up in an administration, has no party machinery. Abraham Lincoln has an incredible task when people to serve and work with him. He is shown these grounds by President Buchanan, though, before he takes office, and Buchanan actually in this house over here from the White House, but we are up 200 elevation wise, and even though it's completely consumed by the city now, to be effectively 2 miles in the country. And so it gave Lincoln easy access to the White House, which is his office, but also gave him a quiet retreat. So think of this as the Camp David of Lincoln's time. And I'm going to just show the house here again. So Abraham Lincoln, he gets experiences, he gets knowledge of this house from President Buchanan. And then something tragic happens in early 1862. Mary Todd Lincoln, they lose their son, Willie. Both he and his brother, Tad, had come down with serious illness. Tad gets better, Willie doesn't. And so they are just grief-stricken. And so they move up here in April of 1862 to have a little bit of quiet, have a little chance to mourn. And again, to be in a somewhat healthier White Houses. Keep in mind, during the Civil War, President Lincoln has about 5,000 Union troops camping on the south lawn of the White House. So it is not a particularly quiet or probably a very good smelling place. So this really is a retreat. It's not a complete retreat from the war, though, because Soldiers Home, in addition to being housing facilities, I'm just going to rotate around. These are some of the more modern buildings where soldiers. These buildings were not here in this time.
And let's
straight out.
Advance the slide.
Would have had a view straight out to Virginia. Is there an image of Lincoln's Cottage, Alyssa?
One more.
So so this is an area where Lincoln is reminded of the war every day, not only because he conceived his enemy territory, if you will. It's right next to a national cemetery, and every day he is witnessing dozens of burials. There are piles of fresh dirt, and he frequently will walk amongst the graves of the soldiers. Not to mention families who are here for funerals and or visiting their loved ones. Which is also notably special because over the next 3 years, from 1862, 63, and 1864, President Lincoln actually spends a full quarter of his presidency here. He lives in this house, and then every day rides a horse down to the White House, where he works for most of the day. And I'm going to talk about some of those things he would have seen and encountered along on this virtual ride. But just another thing I want to share. So, porch here on this house, and this is a Lincoln. He has a group of soldiers around here. They're called the, and he interacts with the soldiers regularly, inviting them up on the porch to have breakfast with him, inviting them up on the porch to play a game of checkers with him. And as the interpreters here at Lincoln's Cottage will frequent, every soldier thinks, oh yeah, this is my chance to get one up on the president. I'll beat him at checkers. And I don't know if any of them ever beat him. He's apparently very, very good at checkers, and it's a game he loves to trounce on. I also would invite you to come visit Lincoln's Cottage because it is a special place where much of the original walls, windows, handrails, you can like climb the stairs and grab the same banister Abraham Lincoln would have up and down the stairs of Lincoln's Cottage to his bedroom. But I think one of the most special things about this is where President Lincoln writes the Emancipation Proclamation. So I would consider this a pretty holy site in that regard. And this is a museum and site to visit. So I would encourage you to come. It is on the active soldiers' home. So there's a guard booth where you have to check in. and a visitor center where they have a wonderful museum and film and so forth. But they will take you in for tours around Lincoln's Cottage. So it's a great spot. I start moving over to my bicycle. I'm gonna need a second here to set things up on my gimbal. Charlie, do you want to pop in with one of the trivia questions here while I get it set up for a second?
Before Charlie gets to that, I just wanted to interrupt for a second and let people know that as Jeff is riding, if you want him to be bigger on your screen, there is a way to do, if you go into your view options, I believe it's on the top right hand side of your screen, and click side by side view, then you'll be able to see both the presentation and Jeff. And then if there's like a little bar with your cursor will turn into two arrows on top of the bar, and you'll be able to slide that bar back and forth and either make Jeff bigger or make the presentation bigger, whatever is the best for your view.
Cool. Yeah, so I am going to be hopping on the bike. One thing I forgot to mention here that I do want to share quickly is how President Lincoln's son, so they have actually at this point now lost 2 children when they move here. Their eldest, Robert Todd Lincoln, is at Harvard University. Edward has passed away before he was even elected president, and then of course they've just lost Willie. But that's Tad there, and you can see him wearing his soldier's uniform. This was gifted to him by the Bucktails. They give him the honorary title of the 3rd lieutenant, which is not only honorary in Tad's case, but totally made up. And so he would enjoy as a 10-year and 11-year-old marching around with the soldiers and pretending and having fun. So I'm heading out of Old Soldiers Home here, right onto the streets of Washington, D.C. I am not going to follow Lincoln's commute 100% of the way, but about 95% of the way. So there's a few stretches of road that I'm just going to spare myself from riding, in particular a pretty busy 6-lane roadway. So Lincoln's commute was only about 3 miles from
next slide, Alyssa, next slide. Thank you.
It's about 3 miles from the White House out to Lincoln's Cottage. There we can see the route. You can see up towards the top with the red arrow. This is the sort of the very beginning. So we're turning onto Rock Creek Church Roadway, which Lincoln would have ridden down to a stretch of road called the 7th Street Turnpike. Today in Washington, D.C., we know the street as Georgia Avenue. So I'm going to be on Georgia Avenue for a short stretch, but not the whole thing. I'm going to go further down Old Soldiers Home property and show you another seasonal spot. So we're just riding down there. The Old Soldiers Home grounds are beautiful and quite expansive. And I should mention for all my cyclist friends here that they also host a cycle out here, which is a beloved part of the cycling scene. All right, this building right in front of us here, this is Ivy Gate. And this is how President Lincoln would have entered and exited out of Soldiers Home. One of my favorite accounts. Okay, so first of all, I do want to explain that President Lincoln rides horseback by himself. We are in the Civil War. The District of Columbia is completely surrounded by Maryland, which is not seceded from the nation, but has a lot of Southern sympathizers, and Virginia, which has seceded from the nation. And so Washington, D.C. is not only surrounded by a lot of Southern sympathizers, it is infused with a lot of Southern spies, and it's pretty close to the front line. In fact, DC has 60 fortifications between forts and batteries and so forth around the city. It is the most heavily fortified city in the world during the Civil War. And but Lincoln is still riding horseback by himself, which is pretty risky. He has many advisors who are like, you know, please travel with cavalry, travel with an armed guard, and he keeps just sort of like, nah, I don't need that. So there's an account where one of the guards here at Ivy Gate is on post. He hears a gunshot in the evening, and just a few minutes later, the president comes up on his horse at a pretty good clip, and so he jumps out towards the president. He goes, you know, sir, are you okay? And he goes, oh yeah, no, I'm fine. Some errant hunter's gun misfired, and it startled my horse. And he's like, really? He goes, yeah, I'm perfectly fine. I'm sure it was an absolute accident. And so the President Lincoln proceeds on in while this guard decides he's going to investigate a little bit. And so this guard goes out, walks towards the 7th Street Turnpike, and as he's walking along this country lane, he finds Abraham Lincoln's stovepipe hat, his plug hat, and there is a bullet hole right through the top of his hat. He decides maybe he should return this to the president. And next morning, the president comes out. He walks up to him and says, Mr. President, I found this on the road. And the president thanks him. And then he turns to the soldiers around with the soldier. And he says, gentlemen, not a word of this to Mrs. Lincoln. So after that first summer, Lincoln finally does agree to have escort. He still will ride by himself once in a while, but usually he has a cavalry, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. The other thing I want to highlight is if we look just a little bit to the north of us here, further up this road, we would be a mile and a half from Fort Stevens. And Fort Stevens is the only fort in Washington, D.C. that is fully attacked by the Confederates during the Civil War. There's some research done on the condition of the forts, and a report put out showing that Fort Stevens is the weakest of the forts and that they need to do some work to reinforce it, particularly with better trained soldiers who are a little more lively. And this report falls into spies' hands, and General Jubilo Early leads a charge to circle around Washington, D.C. and attack from the north at Fort Stevens. Fortunately for us in history, Jubilo Early is delayed at the Battle of Monocacy, and so the Union is able to reinforce and hold off the Confederates. About 10,000 Confederate soldiers try attacking the fort, but do not have luck. Lincoln, sorry, I've got a honking garbage truck nearby. President Lincoln actually goes up to inspect right after the battle and is standing up on the fort's earthworks, the berm, sort of looking over this field with thousands of Confederate soldiers below, when some Confederate sharpshooter recognizes the profile of the man who is standing up on those earthworks and decides, hey, that could well be the president. And he takes his turn at trying to take a shot. There is a bullet that hits the man standing next to Abraham Lincoln in the shoulder. Does not mortally wound him, but does hit this man literally feet away from President Lincoln. And at which point there's a big scuffle. One of the young soldiers nearby, and there are multiple different accounts of who said this, but there is uniformity in that what is said is, "Get down, you fool." And the president turns and thanks the soldier. So another close call for President Lincoln, not too far from Lincoln's Cottage. We're gonna go ahead and turn around here. Wait for this car, and then we're gonna continue cruising on down Rock Creek Church Road. What I'm gonna do in about a block here is take advantage of one of DC's beautiful new protected bikeways and ride parallel to the 7th Street Turnpike. I'm just about a block off this much busier road, but I'm also gonna be able to show you another key site. Stop. Go ahead. So Charlie, while I'm biking down Park Road, if you wanna play with one of the trivia questions and see you get for responses here, go for it.
All right, I'll do it. You
Or if
gave
there's any
away the
questions
you gave away the answer to the first question already. So
in the chat. Oh, which one was that? I forget. Or you can ask the
what
question.
was
see if
what
people
was
are
the
paying
nickname
attention.
for 9-year-old Todd Lincoln? So
Well, we'll see who's paying attention. Let's see what answers we get.
all right. The second question we have here, Abraham Lincoln held all of the following offices except one. Which one would that be? We have A, state representative, B, town postmaster, C, U.S. senator, or D, U.S. congressman. So if people want to put their answers into the chat and have some fun, we can follow that one. Jeff is, I believe, are you by the hospital site right now?
Not yet. I'm almost there. That's our next little spot.
Okay.
So I'm biking down what is called Park Road in Northwest DC. I'm going to scan the camera to the right, where you can see I'm cruising by the old soldiers' home ground, and I've got a big fence right here. But you can see it's an expansive ground. To my right, we've got a lovely little neighborhood, lots of little row houses, and I'm enjoying this beautiful new protected bike road. And I'm about a block away from our next spot.
Okay. So Jeff is heading towards well, he'll give you some of the details about the hospital that was there, but and in between the hospital that is there today and the hospital that was there during Abraham Lincoln's time, it's still called Washington Hospital Center. But I was born in that hospital many years ago, so it's always kind of fun to head by that part of town to see where I came into the world. Making those things, making my life a lot better.
Charlie's first cries. We need better infrastructure. Wah!
Yes, my mom could not ride her bicycle to the hospital to give birth to me. So
that's right. That's right.
But now is a large complex of hospitals: Children's National Hospital, the Washington Hospital Center, some others. It is one of probably the biggest medical center in Washington D.C.
Yes. So we have, as Charlie mentioned, if you can look, I don't know if you can see this little sort of reflective blob on the right. That is Children's National Hospital. To the left of it, this is MedStar. I'm going to cross over on the street. Actually, you're going to get to also see one of our nicest pieces. This is the Irving Street protected bike. This is like a cross-town bike highway for us here in Washington, D.C. Connects about 1.5 miles from the Northwest neighborhood to Northeast. So I'm just going to hop off for a second and try to get the hospital in here a little better. I'm sorry I can't zoom in. It's one thing about Zoom. You can't zoom. I hate it. Not only do we have Children's National and MedStar, but we also have a VA hospital way in the background today. But like a lot of places in Washington, D.C. during the Civil War, pretty much any space that wasn't already heavily in use was turned into a hospital. So the Patent Office is one of the most famous hospitals in Washington, D.C., where Clara Barton worked as a nurse, as well as some others we'll mention a little later. So you can see a picture there, an illustration rather, I should say, of Harewood Hospital. So it's kind of cool that there is still hospitals on the exact site. I want to highlight this one because Mary Todd Lincoln, who gets I think a pretty bad rap. I think she must have been a challenging person in many ways, but I think we should also have a little sympathy that over the course of her lifetime, she loses 3 of her 4 children, is admitted to an institution by her 4th child, and of course, very traumatically loses her husband when he is shot next to her. So keeping all that in mind, I have a lot more sympathy for Mary Todd Lincoln. But here's one of my favorite stories that I learned from one of the historians at President Lincoln's Cottage is that Mrs. Lincoln would come here frequently, visit soldiers, read to them, and write letters home for them, especially if they were injured and not able to write or were not, were illiterate effectively. And in many cases, she was just traveling incognito. They just saw a kind woman who is tending to them, and don't have any idea that she is the First Lady of the United States. So some of them do not find out about this until they get letters back from their family that say, how wonderful to hear from you, how amazing that the First Lady transcribed your letter for you. And they're like, oh, who was that? Mary Todd Lincoln is also in a pretty severe carriage accident. It's potentially sabotaged. Nothing has ever been proven, but Mary Todd Lincoln gets serious concussion from this carriage accident. Obviously, does not kill her, but she is a different person after that crash. So another thing that works against her. I'm going to go ahead and keep writing along, and I'll mention one more thing about Mary is that her family did own were enslavers, and she had brothers who fought for the Confederacy. So I got some big trucks going by. So there was a lot of mistrust of Mary Todd Lincoln as to whether she might be, enabling, if you will, and or aiding the South in one way or another. All right, I don't know if you want to. Oh yes, thank you. There's that letter.
So Jeff will be very shortly. He'll be passing Howard University. I'll kind of give you a little bit of background, about the university, how it came to be. But these days, it's well known as the alma mater of Kamala Harris, the current vice president. It's also the alma mater of Thurgood Marshall and many other prominent African Americans. It is a historically HBCU and a big fixture in the Washington, D.C. community. It started shortly after the Civil War when people really started to understand, or one of the ways to help the enslaved people who had been freed. Many in the community felt that education was the best way to help these people move forward and lead full lives. So the university was started shortly after the Civil War. I forget the exact year, and it was what was the original name, Jeff? I don't recall.
I will hang on. Let me get over there, and then I'll talk about it. I'm just trying to get by these trucks. So okay. I am coming up on Georgia Avenue. This is at the time called the 7th Street Turnpike. So I'm going to focus a bit. Oh, good. We have construction too. I'm going to focus on this a little bit. We'll be there in about 2 blocks. So if you want to maybe read answers from the last trivia question, or
all right, we did.
If there's any other questions from people.
We did have somebody who did correctly give Todd's nickname, which was the 3rd lieutenant, but they were not correct in answering the question. They said U.S. Congressman. Following person said he was never a senator. So that is correct. He was never a U.S. senator. He was a member of the House of Representatives. So, and he was a postmaster as well. So he had been in Washington, D.C. And as Jeff tells us, if anybody has been on some other tours, that Abraham Lincoln was at when they laid the stones for the Washington Monument as a congressman. He was actually at the ceremony where the beginning of the construction of the Washington Monument. So he's a couple of his different times to Washington, D.C.
Also a good touchstone. He does serve just one term. Serves just one term in the House of Representatives, and he's pretty disillusioned. Sort of gets out of it for a little while. Returns to being a lawyer, and then he does decide to run for the Senate. And so the Lincoln-Douglas debates, which is a race he ultimately loses to Stephen Douglas. The Lincoln-Douglas debates, of course, are a really important time when Lincoln does rise to some level of national prominence. As a freshman member of Congress, he's just one of many hundreds of members of Congress, not well known. But it's those debates which largely, so I shouldn't say largely, but do include discussions about slavery. And Lincoln Lincoln's, a lot of historians cite that Lincoln's belief is that slavery is going to die its own death. He's not trying to end it, but he doesn't want to expand it. And so as all these Western states are being added on, the Missouri Compromise effectively says, okay, one slave state, one free state. And it sort of goes back and forth like that. We're here at Howard University. I've got one building here in image. I'm going to actually move down a little bit. We can see one of the older buildings, Old Main. That's right down here, and I'll explain on this. So Lincoln does lose his run for Senate. Douglas prevails, but then Lincoln goes on to beat Douglas, who I believe also runs against him as a presidential candidate. So there's Old Main, that cool old house, semi-Gothic type design. And so this is Howard University. Howard, is Charlie referenced, there's several people who believe education's key. General Howard, Otis Howard of Maine, is Lincoln's cabinet member. He is a general during the Civil War, but Lincoln appoints him as head of the Freedmen's Bureau. And as the Freedmen's Bureau head, he is trying to figure out what do we need to do. And obviously education and training are key components that he focuses on. And it's members of General Howard's church who start the university, and it did have a different name, but it is chartered by the U.S. government. They follow the charter of Gallaudet University, which President Lincoln had signed to create Gallaudet, and so, as I understand, students at Gallaudet and Howard actually have their diplomas signed by the President of the United States, which is kind of a cool thing. So Charlie mentioned some of the illustrious alums of this amazing institution. I also have a family member. My children's older brother is a senior here at Howard. Yeah, it's an amazing institution. So General Howard goes on not only to help found this university with several leaders of the church, he is the first president, and it's not renamed in his honor until at least a decade or two after he has left. And the church that General Howard and his other the founders belong to, six of the seven presidents, six of the first seven presidents of Howard University are all members of this church. So quite a linkage here. I'm going to go around a big honking pothole. That was a kettle hole. We're not going to call that a pothole. That was a kettle hole. All right, so you might have just noticed a red light, and I'm starting to move forward, and that's probably because you can't see the pedestrian light I had, which is a wonderful law we have in DC. Bikes get to go on the ped lights. So I just want to make it clear there, I'm not running red lights. I'm following my duly traffic laws for the bicyclist of the nation's capital.
So Jeff,
we've also got a shared bus and bikes. Go for it.
I'll point out, somebody in the chat pointed out to somebody from actually Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, that part of the Howard University campus is the location of the former Griffith Stadium, which was the home of the then Washington Redskins, now Commanders, as well as Washington Senators. It was also home to the Homestead Grays, which was a baseball team in the Negro Leagues that split their time between Washington, D.C. and Pittsburgh. I would point out, Jeff always likes, my father, I grew up in Washington, or Arlington, Washington area. My father did as well, so we always try to work him into the tours. And he's one of the few people who saw baseball games played by Washington baseball teams at Griffith Stadium, RFK, Robert F. Kennedy Memorial Stadium, and now the new Nats Park. So he was always pretty proud of having seen games in all three locations.
Awesome. Well, we are here at Florida Avenue. Florida Avenue used to be called Boundary Road. This was the edge of Washington, D.C. So during Lincoln's time, during the Civil War, we would still be traveling another mile before we'd be hitting any housing developments. But this was considered the urban line, the boundary of Washington, D.C. And it's really not until, I think, the very early 1900s before Washington starts expanding beyond. Boundary Road is also within the perimeter of L'Enfant's first drawings and plans of Washington, D.C. All right, I got a steel plate here, so there might be a big bump. All right. So we also just passed by U Street, which is we're in Shaw, the Shaw neighborhood in the U Street district. U Street used to be referred to as the Black Broadway, an amazing cultural institution. Duke Ellington's club was there. Many very famous African American artists, performers, and so forth. This was an area where they shined, especially during segregated times. Once Broadway in New York started integrating, then a lot of them flocked up to New York as well. I'm right here at the intersection of R and 7th Streets Northwest. The bigger street up ahead is Rhode Island Avenue. And this is where Abraham Lincoln would make a little jog and turn right. Oh, there's a great picture of the 7th Street Turnpike. Yeah, I love the obviously dirt roads at that time. So I'm gonna be turning on Rhode Island Avenue, which is also a pretty good busy road. It is US Route 1 into Washington, D.C. And we're gonna be riding that about half a mile, and my favorite stop coming up. So Charlie, if you don't mind holding off on that one till we get there, and
Okay.
can you maybe ask another trivia question?
All right, the next trivia question would be, what famous poet noted seeing Lincoln on his daily commute to the White House? Would that be A, Robert Frost, B, Walt Whitman, C, Amanda Gorman, or D, Emily Dickinson? And if you can advance the slide, Alyssa, that'd be great. That kind of gives you a sense of where, looking at the commute and where Jeff is near where the red arrow is.
I'm at the tail end of that arrow right now, and I'm going down that little stretch towards Logan Circle.
Yep.
So that's my next stop in about 4 blocks. All right, repeat the question again, Charlie.
All right, so we're let's see, we got a couple answers in there, but what famous poet noted seeing Lincoln on his daily commute to the White House? Would that be Robert Frost, A, Robert Frost, B, Walt Whitman, C, Amanda Gorman, or D, Emily Dickinson? We have one so far correct answer and one answer that is not correct.
I'm hoping no one's answering Amanda Gorman. I'm a fan, but she's a little young.
Yep.
I mean, I have to explain to my guests sometimes when I tell them about Abraham Lincoln surveying a road through my yard. Every once in a while, I'll get a kid who says, "Did you know him?" I'm like, my God, I'm not that old. I know age isn't fun, but geez. So I sometimes just start off my stories by long before I was born, Abraham Lincoln walked through my yard.
But of the two answers that we got, we had one was Robert Frost. The other is the correct answer, which is Walt Whitman. And Jeff will talk a little bit more about Walt Whitman in just a little bit. But he was a famous resident of the district and for many years. And we'll talk a little bit more about what he did while he was here and how he would interact or see with President Lincoln. Is that the circle right in front of you there, Jeff?
Yeah, so I'm at Logan Circle. I'm just waiting to cross the road. The traffic is going to be crossing from the left as well, so I'm going to wait for that ped light. But let me go ahead and start talking about it. So Logan Circle today is originally known as Iowa Circle, and it was in part of L'Enfant's plan for all the diagonal and grid of streets in Washington, D.C. So this is where Lincoln pivoted from leaving the White House from Vermont Avenue to Rhode Island Avenue on his way to the 7th Street Turnpike. But this was a contraband camp during the Civil War. Now, let me explain that in a second. So there are hundreds of thousands of African Americans who fight and earn their freedom throughout the Civil War. Of course, the Emancipation Proclamation that Abe writes at Lincoln's Cottage is also a huge spur to that. What many people don't know, and I didn't mention about the Emancipation Proclamation, is that it is also simultaneously a draft for all able-bodied African American men. I'm just going to park my bike here for a second and walk around with the camera. So give me 1 second. So there are, let me just switch this over to. There are several contraband camps, several refugee camps for recently enslaved African Americans around Washington, D.C. But this spot here at Logan Circle, this is one of the largest. There are estimated 5,000 African Americans encamped here at Iowa Circle at the time. And the reason that these African American refugees are referred to as contraband is because there would be slaves who escaped, taking their own freedom, and they would run to the Union soldiers. And the Union soldiers half the time were like, "Well, I don't know what to do with you." There is, and I'm sorry, I'm not remembering the name of this military leader, but he has a couple of slave owners who come to him and say, give us back our property. He goes, "Oh, right. You think they're property. They're human beings, but you think they're property. And we actually have a military code around contraband. So any property that we seize against an enemy of the state becomes ours." And so this spreads like wildfire very quickly because it's a politically brilliant solution. So these people become known as contraband, and so these become known as contraband camps. This contraband camp is right on President Lincoln's route. Okay, so I'm gonna just whip around here real quick and show you that President Lincoln is coming from up Vermont Avenue, and then he's turning and going up Rhode Island Avenue right there. And so he is passing this spot, and it's one where he stops multiple times. There's multiple documentation of him stopping here and engaging with, interacting with, talking to, singing with the people here at this camp. I'm going to actually read you a favorite little passage of mine. This is from Charles Braslin Flood, his book, Lincoln at the Gates of History. And he says, "He enjoyed listening to the singing. Here he stood in the campfire shadows and sang along in a raspy monotone. One evening, he and the Black refugee sang America and Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. After that, when they finished Every Time I Feel the Spirit, Lincoln is seen wiping tears from his face. He remained silent with his head bowed as the Black people around him sang, 'Thank God I am free at last.'" So that image of our president literally interacting with the most traumatized, destitute, and oppressed people is one that I savor. This Iowa Circle gets renamed as Logan Circle after General Logan. Now, General Logan is a fascinating character to me. He is also from Illinois. He's from Southern Illinois, and also served as a state legislator. And in his early days, he was absolutely a white supremacist. He actually proposed and or sponsored legislation in the Illinois state legislature that not only, because Illinois was a free state, they didn't allow slavery, but he actually says we shouldn't allow Blacks, period. So he's trying to make it a whites only state. He is a Democrat. He is serving in the Senate of U.S. Congress when the Civil War breaks out. And again, he's a Democrat, so he's on the opposite side of Lincoln politically. He runs up to the Battle of Bull Run like many members of Congress did, and has a transformation. He switches to become a Republican. He volunteers to serve as an officer and becomes a general. There are a lot of political generals, if you will. Not many of them have good track records, and Logan is the exception. He is beloved by his soldiers. He is able to rally them up and is pretty great militarily. He also has a transformation in appreciating the abilities of African Americans, and he becomes a champion of this contraband concept. He becomes a champion of enabling and empowering African Americans to serve in the military. And he has such a complete transformation and is so beloved even by the African American community that when he announces in the early 1880s that he is going to be the vice presidential candidate, over 5,000 people show up in this park to rally him on. His home is right, I don't know if you can see a bus right over here, and then there's a brick house with like a white porch on it. That is General Logan's house, and also obviously part of why they chose to honor him. He is also buried here in Washington, D.C., not at Arlington, not at the Congressional Cemetery. He is buried at Old Soldiers' Home. He actually has the most prominent vault at Old Soldiers' Home up by President Lincoln's cottage. So if you go up to Lincoln's cottage on a future visit to Washington, D.C., or if you live here, be sure to ask and walk around to check out General Logan's vault. It's a pretty cool spot. All right. I think I'm going to pedal along here. Let me try to get my gimbal reconnected here. 1 second. All right. So again, this is where Lincoln would have turned off of Rhode Island Avenue. There was no paved roads. I don't know how much the circle was formed, but he would have turned to go down Vermont Avenue. Now, one thing that's kind of fun when I'm doing these tours in person is to stop at a house that we're just going to pass by. It's the home of Mary McLeod Bethune, who is an early civil rights activist and leader in the early 1900s. Mary McLeod Bethune particularly tries to leverage the star power of many prominent African-American artists in the 1920s, 30s, and 40s to champion, the early civil rights movement.
Hey, Jeff, you need to turn that image around on your camera.
Oh, thank you for letting me know. Good Lord. Just stuck looking at my belly while I'm riding along here. That's embarrassing. All right.
I won't make any questions or comments about that.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been well fed this winter. All right. Crossing here into Vermont Avenue, hopping in the bike lane. One of the things, so I'm going to just scan to the right. Mary McLeod Bethune's house is a national park site. It's this place right here. One of the things that's really wild about it is that she is 2 doors down from a house that serves as effectively a care center for Confederate veterans. So I just had to be a fascinating little melting pot there. We're coming up here on Thomas Circle, where 14th Street intersects Vermont Ave, intersects M Street, and so yeah, it's a fun little cluster here. We're gonna have to wait for the light, but we do have a bike lane all the way around the traffic circle. We are about half a mile at this point, maybe 3/4 mile at the most, from the White House. We've got a very, very cool and prominent church right here. And actually, I'm going to scan to the right. This is one of my favorite churches directly to my right. We got a nice statue of Martin Luther, but this beautiful church here, this is designed by one of my favorite architects in Washington, D.C. from the late 1800s. His name is Adolf Klaus. And for any of you who've ever been to or know about Eastern Market, that's one of his buildings. He also designed the Smithsonian Arts and Industries building that's built between 1879 and 1881, right next to the Smithsonian Institution building, the castle. He also designs the Stevens School, which is the first high school for African Americans here in the city, and it's a beautiful. He does a lot of work with brick and then sort of uses a lot of brownstone, and just one of my favorite architects. All right, here we go into Thomas Circle.
So while Jeff is navigating the circle, I'll ask another one of our trivia questions.
Great.
So Lincoln had 3 opponents in the 1860 election. Which of the following was not one of them? Would it be A, Stephen Douglas, B, John Bell, C, John Breckinridge, or D, Alexander Stevens? I'll read you those names again. Who was not one of Lincoln's opponents in the 1860 presidential election? A, Stephen Douglas, B, John Bell, C, John Breckinridge, or D, Alexander Stevens?
All right, well, you're contemplating that one and hopefully not Googling and cheating. I'm going to pull over here and show you a prominent spot. We're right on Vermont Avenue, and we're near L Street, which has a beautiful protected bikeway as well, one of the first in DC. But off to my left here, let me see if I can get this to cooperate. All right, I got this beautiful modern 1980s building. Attractive, isn't it? All right. Now, obviously, this was not here during Lincoln's time, but right on this property, there was a series of row houses, and in one of those row houses lived Walt Whitman, and Walt Whitman does see President Lincoln going by almost on a daily basis, and he notes this in his journal quite regularly, and. I don't have the full quote on me at the moment, but it's a wonderful account where he talks about exchanging glances with the president, often tipping hats towards each other, and how he sees Lincoln riding by himself a lot that first year, all the time, the first year, 1862, and then how as he proceeds with the cavalry in future years, how the cavalry, about 20 men on their horses, are riding along with their sabers drawn and held high in the air. And I love that image of how imposing a sight of that was, and of course how probably it also drove Abraham Lincoln crazy to have such a big fuss about him. We're continuing straight now. If we could look straight ahead. Down about 4 blocks, we would be looking directly at the White House. I can see a chimney and the flagpole of the White House, but I doubt you can, given the small image and not able to zoom in. But we are heading right towards McPherson Square, where we're going to do a little zigzag around and continue on Vermont Avenue, the last block or so, to the Executive Mansion, as it's still officially called during Lincoln's time. Lincoln had another name for the White House. He referred to it as an iron cage. And we'll talk about that a little bit more once we get up here. Let me just scooch around here and get on this service road. And we'll be able to continue on. Parallel Parker. We're also just about a block and a half from the League's offices, so little wave. Little wave to the League. I know they're all down at the summit right now, but here on K Street, hopping over the 15th Street protected bikeway. And then we're going to just zoom right into the White House.
So if we want to we had one answer to our.
Oh yes, go for it.
One response, which was not correct. So the 3, Stephen Douglas, John Bell, and John Breckinridge were Lincoln's opponents in the election. Alexander Stevens was the Confederate vice president, so he was not in the election in 1860.
Trick question. That one's courtesy of my my presidential scholar friend Johnny, who used to work at Lincoln's Cottage and is now working on his graduate degree down in Texas. Yeah, so Lincoln wins a four-way race. Imagine that, four different presidential candidates, and Lincoln wins with 38% of the vote. Well, we got truck steering right with red arrows. That's good. Sorry for the commentary. So Lincoln wins a four-way race. He wins the presidency with 38% of the vote. And I think it's also fair to point out, not that he would have gotten a lot of votes in southern states to begin with, but he is not even on the ballot in 10 states, the 10 southern states who all break away and form the Confederate States of America. So talk about contentious times, as if that's not enough. Abraham Lincoln is the first Republican president, and he does not have the party machine. He has an incredibly crazy job of sorting through thousands of office seekers. So you can imagine, with the new president, you've got people from all sorts of different parties who are like, oh, sir, let me help you with this. Let me be your deputy of this. Let me be your cabinet member for that. And he has to sift through all that. He doesn't have any infrastructure, any party infrastructure, no machine, as we might jokingly call it, to help him figure out who and what and how. He's just got this incredible administrative task while the country is falling into civil war. So it is not an easy time for Lincoln at all, as I mentioned earlier. We are here on the sidewalk in front of Lafayette Square and rolling over towards 16th Street, where we are going to turn and be looking directly at the White House from the front. You can notice on the right, maybe a few of the cherry trees. We are still at peak bloom. It's amazing in DC right now, not to make you all jealous. But here we are at the White House. Got a statue of Andrew Jackson here closer to us. It doesn't go up till much later. But here we are at the White House. And again, Lincoln refers to this as an iron cage. He feels imprisoned here. And part of the reason is the White House has an open door policy. You want to talk to the president, you knock on the door, and you walk on in. You go have a quick chat with the president. I'm going to just park over here real quick and hold the camera again while we finish up here. So give me a second to switch around. Oh, thank you. There's a wonderful quote there from one of the women who was at the contraband camp, and her memory of seeing President Lincoln passing by almost daily. All right, so I am here in Lafayette Square, right in front of the White House. And so Lincoln is completely overwhelmed with all these office seekers, with the challenges of a country that's going into war, not to mention the political and military things he has to deal with. But you wanted to talk to the president, you walked on in. And I've read Frederick Douglass's account of him going in to meet with President Lincoln. So imagine he's, of course, the only Black man in the halls of the White House when he goes to meet with the president. And you can imagine plenty of people who were like not particularly polite to Frederick Douglass. But he talks about, men light up at every corridor, standing around. That he's lucky enough he gets to sit on a stair, and then after just a few minutes, President Lincoln pokes his head out and calls Frederick Douglass in. So we've got all these folks here. We've got a pretty oppressive sort of work situation where the president literally doesn't get to sneak out. Near the White House, this is where the Secretary of War's office was, or the War Department, I should say. And Abe Lincoln would spend a lot of time there. One, he had access to the telegrams. So it was the instant communications of the time that he was able to find out what was happening on battlefields, but it was also a guarded space. no one could just walk into the War Department. And so that was a quieter place for the president to hang out. And there are many accounts of him falling asleep there, reading telegrams, and of course interacting with the soldiers. I think that's one of the other things that I haven't mentioned is that Lincoln's commute to and from Lincoln's Cottage gives him a remarkable amount of access to the people on the streets, and he can interact with people both to and from Lincoln's Cottage, and even with the soldiers at Lincoln's Cottage. Ask them how they're doing, how the war is impacting them and their families, and he gets these daily reminders. So it is a remarkable story. I absolutely invite you to come, next time to DC, to put President Lincoln's Cottage on your to-do list, because it is a favorite gem of mine, and one that I regularly refer guests to. I want to thank Charlie and Alyssa for all their help, and I would love to answer any questions we might have at this point, Charlie.
I would point out that we had one participant, I just wrote his name down, Dick Norford, who's from somewhere in Pennsylvania, but he did answer. He pointed out that General Butler was the name that you couldn't remember of the person who came up with the contraband.
Thank you, Dick.
He also said that he too saw baseball games at all 3 stadiums, and as did I. Grew up in Northern Virginia. So, Dick, it's nice to meet you virtually, and it's very fun to have you as part of our presentation here today, our tour here today.
I know Dick. He's been involved with advocacy in Pennsylvania for many years. So even when I was working at the Alliance for Biking and Walking, I got to work with Dick a lot. So great to have you along with us today, Dick. Thank you for helping answer what I couldn't remember. I'm gonna tag you to help out on this next time. Any other good questions?
And if anybody is after watching the tour, wants to hop on a plane and get here by 5:30, we're doing a Watergate tour, a live tour this evening. So if you can get to DC by 5:30, please try and join us. Otherwise, that could be one of our virtual tours for next year. So
yes, I think that'd be a good one to do virtually next year. So I've got Lincoln Cottage's website up there. So be sure to check them out. They are back and fully open again. After having had pretty heavy restrictions, given that it's a retirement home for veterans, they now are able to have people back on the grounds and have regular hours. So it is a wonderful place. They actually have a fantastic website and a lot of good information there. So do check them out, even if you're not going to be able to get into Washington, D.C. anytime soon. And there's some of my contact information, social media, whatnot. So feel free to tag or follow along on social media. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. I hope you're having a fantastic summit. I hope you continue to have some excellent sessions, and I'll hope to see you on virtual rides or rides in person in future summits. So if there's anything else, thank you all.
Thank you so much for coming, and thank you to Jeff and to Charlie for this amazing virtual ride. This is always a treat to have you. So I will see the rest of you at the rest of the summit.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.